Lindsey German, convener of the Stop the War Coalition. Thanks for joining us today.
It's good to see you again. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, dear Lindsay. As you read on the news, there is the latest attacks, the latest Turkish war crimes are on, and 9 Arab people has been killed in Zaho. The bombardment targeted a tourist site. As a result of the attack, 26 other civilians were injured as well. Rather than 9 people lost their life. How would you comment on the Turkey's latest war crime?
Well, I think that this is an issue which the whole world is really ignoring, and it's a terrible war crime in itself. It's killed a number of civilians, as you say, Arab civilians from Iraq. It's actually injured a great deal more people. But we know this isn't just one isolated instance. This is something that has been going on, is continuing to go on. And whereas in some parts of the world, obviously in Ukraine, but elsewhere, you would hear condemnation about this kind of attack from the British government, from a whole number of the EU governments. This time, there is really nothing. And I think you have to connect at least part of that with the very important role that Turkey is playing in relation to the Ukraine war and in relation to NATO in particular. And if you look, the recent deal that's been done to allow grain through the Black Sea, which was brokered by the UN, but also by Turkey, and of course Turkey's central role in the admission of Finland and Sweden into NATO, that Turkey opposed this until it got huge amounts of concessions to do with the way in which Kurds are treated in Sweden in particular, and that more of them will be deported back to Turkey, but also with more weapons coming from the US. So I think you can't look at the way in which this is ignored internationally without considering the much wider geopolitics. And it's a very unfortunate fact that while people talk about war crimes and dictatorship and so on elsewhere, they're allowing Turkey to carry on like this with complete impunity.
Yeah, you mentioned about the silence of the Western powers, basically. But when it comes to the Ukraine, they break that silence. Community of the peacemakers team, which is called CPT, were able to confirm and announce that the artillery shells were fired from the Hatire place, where is the military outpost belongings to the Turkish military, but based in southern Kurdistan. Evidences are clear, and still, why do you think Western powers are protecting Turkey by keeping silence against the Turkish war crimes? Very shortly.
Well, I think because Turkey is so important to NATO and is so important to the whole European makeup, political makeup, if you like. And Turkey isn't a member of the European Union and won't be allowed to join the European Union, but it plays an incredibly important role militarily. It also plays a role in terms of policing the refugees from the Middle East and from Afghanistan who want to go into Europe and are being held in Turkey. So I think this you have to see this as very much connected. Obviously, there's much longer term things, the way in which the Kurds have always been treated internationally. But I think if you look at the present time, this is a particularly acute problem and a big crisis in terms of the Middle East.
Thank you, dear Lindsay. Despite the silence of the international community, the people of Baghdad, Basra, Mosul, Kirkuk, and Nineveh as well took the streets to the protest, the massacre in Zaho, and closed down the Turkish consulate and its embassy as well. Erdogan is being emblooded in these attacks by the silence and approval of the UN, the USA, NATO, the EU as well, and regional states. What kind of action should these powers take against Turkey if they break the silence?
Well, I think it's obvious that there should be condemnation of Turkey. We have a United Nations which doesn't really respond to these kind of things, and less powerful in the face of the major countries, the major imperialisms, obviously, like the United States. So I think it's very, very important that we do highlight what's going on, and also it's clear that government in Iraq and no doubt elsewhere is very concerned about this. Now, they make these kind of agreements with Turkey because it's an easy thing to do. It solves their immediate problem. They don't think about the long-term question at all. They don't think about human rights in relation to the Kurds and to other groups in the region. They don't think about human rights in relation to anything at all, apart from their own. It suits them to make propaganda about it at certain times, but they're willing to ignore human rights abuses, war crimes, and everything else if it suits them politically to do. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Thank you, dear Lindsay. Another significant issue, once I find I would like to ask that as well. We read of the Turkish using chemical weapons and substances. Reports has been published about that. A delegation went even to the region, and reports has been submitted to the OPCW as well. Can you shed light on these chemical weapons topic? We heard that also UK is selling these kind of weapons, as well as we know that UK is one of the biggest arms trader to Turkey. And can you explain what should be done in response about this?
Well, as you know, there are supposedly all sorts of laws and restrictions which limit the use of chemical weapons, which are illegal. Using them is a war crime, and quite rightly. They have a devastating effect on the civilian population. But of course, they are used quite widely, and very little is said about this. And again, there's a very selective approach to it. I think that I think Britain should stop selling arms to Turkey, full stop, regard chemical weapons, any other weapons that they sell. And I think it should be made clear that no weapons should be sold to anywhere where there are abuses of human rights. Now, of course, this would make the arms industry considerably smaller, because it is sold to these weapons are sold to countries which have a very bad record on human rights. That, it seems to me, would be a solution to the problem. But of course, the arms industry is tied in with governments. It's tied in with very important figures in terms of politics. So there's great resistance to doing this.
Thank you, dear Lindsay. Let's talk lastly about the international community as well. What should the international community be doing about the use of chemical weapons by Turkey? As you mentioned, it's a war crime as well. Do you think there can or should be independent observers to the region, or samples from the region sent elsewhere for analysis? Like how these chemical weapons will be proven, because the OPCW, which should take action, doesn't take action, and it's the only official EU institution to get this job done. So how does that going to work very shortly?
Well, that is a major problem if the Office for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons isn't taking samples. And of course, it makes it very, very difficult for people to prove. I think all we can do is raise these things to protest against what's happening, to protest against the use of chemical weapons by Turkey, to protest over all these things, and to make people aware of what is going on, and to force the OPCW to really take a much tougher line on this. But again, it seems to me there are places where there are times when they put a lot of effort into collecting evidence of chemical weapons use, other times much less so. So this is something where, again, we have to look at the double standards which exist inside the whole of the very unequal setup which is referred to as the international community, and the seriousness with which some of these charges are taken, which is unfortunately they're often not investigated properly if it's regarded as something which isn't easy politically for the Western powers to accept.
Dear Lindsey German, convener of the Stop the War Coalition, thanks for joining us. Thank you for your valuable comments.
Thank you very much. I'll see
Thank
you soon.